Hi, and welcome to the hazy, hot, and humid edition of The Coffee House, where in the next hour, two views on whether EPA and Maryland choked on Baltimore's smog problem. Cell phones while driving. Ready for an outright ban? Ho-hum. Did someone say there's a presidential race going on? Take a hike on Campaign Trail 2000 with the Washington Post's Kevin Merida and Mike Powell. Perhaps a female candidate would make things interesting. Eleanor, Clift, and Tom Brazaitis are here to discuss their new book, Madam President. Also, Pat Aufderheide reviews Sunshine, Hungarian Jews in the Century of Emperors, Nazis, and Communists. We've got the sounds of Chuck Durfer and a Laurie Tsang poem.
Hi, and welcome to the forum at the Coffee House. Smog. Our region has lots of it, and that's not healthy. EPA labels the smog situation in the Washington area serious. In the Baltimore area, it's severe. Kids, adults who work or exercise outside, and folks with asthma and the like are at greatest risk. Smog forms when pollutants react to sunlight. Some of these pollutants come from industry. Most are from motor vehicles. The Federal Clean Air Act requires a state to map out plans for cleaning up smog-plagued areas. The state implementation plan must account for how much new road construction will increase vehicle emissions. Last December, the Maryland Department of the Environment proposed a revised state implementation plan allowing for an increase in smog-causing pollutants from motor vehicles in the Baltimore area. U.S. EPA gave the revised plan its interim approval, but over the protests of an environmental group. 1,000 Friends of Maryland sued in federal court, contending that the state and EPA cooked the books in order to make it appear that road building plans won't keep the Baltimore area from meeting air quality goals. With us to sort this out is Rena Steinzor, counsel to 1,000 Friends and director of the University of Maryland School of Law Environmental Clinic, and Michael Powell, attorney for the BWI Business Partnership, which represents business and developer interests in the Baltimore-Washington corridor. Welcome both of you to the Coffee House. And I should say from the beginning that EPA was invited to participate but declined to do so. Rena, why don't you tell us first of all what you're alleging in your lawsuit?
We're basically charging that in projecting the plans that will bring us to good air quality in 2005, EPA cooked the books by cheating the only objective test that is available to make sure that we're going to get there. This area is, as you said in the introduction, severe non-attainment. We have had deadlines that we've missed in 1982, 1987, and the latest one in 2005. And 1,000 Friends of Maryland, my client, believes that we can't afford to cut corners and do subjective fixing of the test just to avoid the disruption of really cracking down on pollution.
Michael, your group isn't the defendant in this case, but you've intervened in this suit because your clients, the Baltimore-Washington corridor, the industrial corridor, these are people who have interests in road construction and development in the area. They're very concerned about this lawsuit. Why?
Well, more than road construction and development, my clients are the major employers in the BWI Business District around the airport. The airport's the second fastest growing airport in the U.S. And indeed, if you follow some of the trends and predict it, it'll soon become the fastest growing airport. And there are a lot of major employers in the area, and they're concerned about getting their employees to work and back. The people with the airport are concerned with the access to the airport and back. And so the reason we intervened is we're concerned about any changes in the process which could delay the need to move quickly on infrastructure, not merely roads, but bike paths, bus transit, shuttle buses, light rail, all of that kind of transportation planning has to be able to move quickly in order to meet the demands in that area.
You're suggesting, Rena, that there is a problem in the modeling that was used here to determine whether by 2005 Baltimore is going to be in attainment. What is it that you think was done wrong in determining whether Baltimore will reach this goal, and what should Maryland and EPA have done?
For a moment, let's talk about what modeling is. Because it's so hard to predict pollution years in the future, scientists have worked on elaborate computer models that simulate the emissions that will be going into the air, the climate changes, the temperature, the location of housing or open fields, and they put all this information into these computer simulations and predict whether we're going to make it by 2005 or not. This is the only objective way we can have of making sure that we stay on track. What happened in this case was the model showed that we were not going to make it. So rather than put new pollution controls into the plan and run them back through the model, EPA came up with this analysis that basically was outlandish and cooked the books in an effort to cheat the model. What they did was to compare information from points as far away as Seven Corners, Virginia, rather than looking at points in Baltimore to confirm what the model was saying and discount to the extent the model was overstating. And we have to feel we have to hold their feet to the fire or we'll never make it by 2005.
What about this modeling issue, Michael?
Well, of course, you're leading into a real arcane subject, but it's simplified. You have to have a bunch of engineers and a bunch of computers sit down and try to figure out exactly what the impacts are if you make changes. We're not just talking about, well, how much emissions come out of a pipe on an automobile. We're talking about assumptions about how far people drive, how often they drive, what kind of vehicles they drive, what kind of options are going to be for mass transit, what kinds of other sources we're going to get.
Let's assume for a minute the imperfection of any kind of modeling that could be done.
Right.
What is the best model that could be used in this situation? Was it used? Should something else have been used?
Well, the model that was used is in fact the model that EPA has approved and has been used across the country. There are different degrees of severity or difficulty of models that you can use. And EPA and Maryland's Department of the Environment have used more difficult, more expensive models when they're doing major revisions to the plant. The question is, do you have to resort to that kinds of extremes every time you make a small change? I mean, sometimes the changes in transportation plans are something like federal money for bus shelters or something. And there have to be limits to just how much effort you put into every minor change.
Is this a minor change?
It is not a minor change because it was a major demonstration that we were on track, which we check only every few years. But I want to stress that the question here was model versus not model, not good model, better model, best model. And EPA is increasingly getting away from modeling, which really concerns my client, 1,000 Friends of Maryland, and instead using what it calls weight of evidence, which we call WOE among ourselves, the acronym being very appropriate in this case. And that is to make subjective judgments about what they see in the plans and to cook the books by trying to shave the numbers when they come out too high. If we keep doing that, we will miss attainment in 2005.
Let's assume that what you're saying is true for a minute. The question is, why would EPA, which is charged with improving the environment of the country, of watching over our health, and under administration of Carol Browner, which many people think, especially in the business community, is, if anything, too aggressive in protecting the environment, why would they turned a blind eye to this or sign off on something that wasn't proper for the health of the Baltimore area?
I'm so glad you asked me that question. EPA is under enormous pressure not to turn back plans, because if they turn back plans, then it is, as Michael's presence here indicates, very disruptive and concerning to the business community. Road building plans go awry. This is very disturbing to state legislators and politicians, and the agency comes under enormous pressure. Administrator Browner, who is trying to do the right thing for the environment, has learned her lesson from the courts and the conservative Congress, and temporizes now when she has to avoid that kind of political reaction.
I think that creates a false impression here, because I don't think that EPA is in fact trying to cook the books or trying to temporize. I mean, anytime that you make these kind of future predictions, there is always some subjective element in it. You can say, we're using this computer model, we're doing something objective, we're doing it scientifically. It comes down to a scientific judgment. The weight of evidence approach is a group of EPA scientists and engineers looking back down and trying as an unbiased a fashion, as a judge that they can, to check the work by the state and see if it was right. And in fact, I think that's what occurred here, is the state did a model and a prediction that was the best that they could do, and then EPA looked at it and said, you're right, that's a good working prediction. We will adjust it as time goes on, we will tweak it as necessary, but for planning purposes, that's a good job, we can proceed.
Let's say that you win this suit in the Fourth Circuit. What will you win? What will happen?
I should say that we're hopeful of working out a solution to this case that will take everybody's interests into account. You describe my client, 1,000 Friends of Maryland, as an environmental group. That's true, but it is a new breed of group that is concerned about sprawl, suburban sprawl, and believes very strongly in the revitalization of the cities and in smart growth, which has become a very important theme of Governor Glendenning's administration. The people that have been very concerned about this lawsuit, Michael's clients have a very specific interest, and I understand that, but there is a whole other group of home builders, road builders, everyone who wishes unrestricted development that are on the other side of the case. And we have some confidence that when we all sit down together with EPA and Governor Glendenning's administration, that we can work out a compromise that will get us back on a more accurate modeling regime for determining whether we're going to make it in 2005. If the case has to go to court, it is possible that the attainment demonstration will be rejected, that the agency will have to remodel, which should take weeks, not months, and that it will then issue a revised budget, and we will go on as if we had done it right to begin with.
Well, that's about all the time we have. I'm sorry. Thanks to Michael Powell of the BWI Partnership and Rena Steinzor of 1,000 Friends of Maryland for joining me in the coffee house. And good luck to Baltimore in cleaning up its air. Campaign trail. And still, no female nominees. A review of the Istvan Szabo's new film, Sunshine, the soft lyrical sounds of Chuck Durfer, and a Laurie Tsang poem. But first,
the sight of frantic drivers clutching cell phones while speeding down the roadway could become a thing of the past in Maryland.
A lot of things you shouldn't do when you're driving. This has become an epidemic.
State Delegate John Arnick says cell phones are creating a serious hazard on the road. That's why he continues to propose a law that would prohibit drivers from using the devices while driving. The veteran Baltimore area lawmaker says the bill was prompted by constituents outraged at what they say is reckless use of cell phones.
There are periods of time I would hear 10 to 15 to 20 complaints a week about being in accidents with people driving using a cell phone or being cut off by them, all sorts of problems with people driving cars with cell phones.
And it's no wonder, because the use of cell phones in the U.S. has skyrocketed in the last few years, from 69 million 2 years ago to some 92 million this year, according to the New York Times. And many of those devices are in the hands of drivers. If Arnick's bill becomes law, it would impose up to a $500 fine on violators. But the cell phone industry argues such a law would be unnecessary and counterproductive.
I think that they would be more effective if they would work with us on education. The studies that have been done talk about education being more effective than legislation.
Edie says reckless driving laws already cover drivers who might endanger others on the roads, whether they're chatting on a cell phone or eating a Big Mac. But unlike Big Macs, the industry says cell phones can enhance safety on the road.
Every day, someone with a wireless phone makes a call that makes us all safer, like Jeff Ogrum, whose call saved a young boy's life.
Maryland State Police see cell phones as a potential hazard, but how big a hazard?
A lot of people do other things like apply makeup, actually read a magazine while they're driving. They're trying to take care of the children in the back seat. So there's a lot of different ways that you could be negligent when you're not watching the roadway. So we can't just say the cell phone's #1 cause.
Nevertheless, the police say drivers should exercise caution when using cell phones on the road.
Use your cell phone wisely. If you're going to be on it for a long period of time, pull over. You can stop on the shoulder for a second or two if you need to. You can pull over into a rest area. Just stay alert to what you're doing on the highway.
Arnick has introduced the bill the last 2 years in the Maryland House of Delegates, so far with little success. But he's encouraged by the fact that a number of counties in the U.S. now ban the use of cell phones by drivers while on the road. And since Arnick has not been successful in getting the bill out of committee, he knows he has a long fight ahead.
I still get complaints almost daily from people who have had accidents or been cut off by people who are using a handheld telephone.
But Edie says hands-free cell phones are already replacing handheld ones, which could render Arnick's bill unnecessary. For the Coffee House, I'm Ross Adams.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of A Second Look at the Coffee House. Remember Bill Bradley and John McCain? At one point in their run for the presidency, they were darlings of the media, and very briefly, they were serious contenders, at least McCain was. Then the boys and girls on the bus turned on them. Bradley and McCain lost credibility and disappeared. At least that's one interpretation of election 2000. However, I have a couple of guests from the Washington Post who may quarrel with this. Welcome, Michael Powell. Welcome, Kevin. Merida, how you doing?
Good.
So is this a notion made up by somebody in TV land that you guys fall in love with candidates and then fall out of love with them just as fast? Or is that it sort of seems that way, but is there any truth to that?
I mean, I think there's some truth to it. I also think that in the case of both McCain and Bradley, that they would have fallen of other wounds that were not self-inflicted and otherwise. But I think there's something to it. I think McCain, in particular, benefited from some very adoring press coverage. I don't think it was that alone. I mean, I think there was a larger phenomenon, but I think clearly there were some reporters and columnists who were infatuated with him.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's a very charming guy. I mean, the whole phenomenon of the Straight Talk Express and being on the bus and having all this access, and it breeds certain kinds of stories. I mean, I don't think that I think there was still a lot more scrutiny than you would think of his campaign, but I think that the fact that he was an affable guy breeds a certain kind of coverage, stories that other candidates don't get because they're not doing the kind of things that he's doing. Even his events, his town hall events, the way that, he has this long podium that goes out into the crowd. He's got confetti. He's got a lot of stuff going on. Bradley, I think, I would probably agree with Michael that a lot of it was self-inflicted. I think that when he was kind of soaring high above the clouds, there was a certain purity to his campaign and the way he was running it, and determined not to get down the muck. And then it's kind of like he let Al Gore bring him down there, and he started duking out down there, and then I think that's when the self-destruction occurred.
All right, let's say that's all true, but I mean, these were two outsiders who didn't have the financial base to compete, so the only way they could make it serious was through an infatuation by columnists and reporters, or at least they needed to be on the front pages of the paper every day in order to be taken seriously. Would you agree? Yes?
Well, I think that for a period of time when Bradley was making inroads, when during the early stages when Gore wasn't taking his candidacy very seriously and thought he had the thing wrapped up, and Bradley quickly gained ground. The polls reflected that. The way people were responding to him reflected that, and I think he got coverage reflecting the seriousness of his candidacy. The fact that he talked about a different kind of politics, the fact that he talked about issues that were really kind of left to the center at the time of the Democratic Party. It already moved to the center in the Clinton administration. Here's a guy talking about child poverty. So I think a lot of what he talked about substantively drew interest, and as he climbed in the polls, he got interest. And then when he started slipping, and it looked like Gore had pretty much done him in, his coverage lessened because he was taken less seriously.
What I'm wondering is, though, I mean, child poverty got him some headlines, but after a while, do these guys have to just sort of figure out all kinds of miscellaneous ways to get coverage, and which may degrade their campaign as a result?
I don't know. I mean, it's a weird funhouse being in a national campaign, and I'm sure. I mean, you end up, there's an element of theater to all of this, but I also think that can sometimes get overstated. I mean, it's a tough time to be running the sort of campaign that Bradley wanted to run, which was ultimately sort of labor-based, social issues.
And above the fray also.
And to stay above precisely to stay above the fray. And then he, of course, had the strategic question, which I think really existed sort of almost apart and aside from the media, which is, how do I engage Gore? Do I attempt, as he did at the beginning, to simply say that, I'm not going to get down there with him. I'm going to keep going with my message. Or do I get down there and do I get, down in the mud and start wailing away? And I think it was his inability to kind of reconcile those. And at the same time, his politics, I think what's the word I'm looking for? I think they were sort of left-leaning, but it was hard substantively. And I think to really pick on a whole lot of differences between Gore's positions and his own, it was just that he put more of a somewhat more left-liberal spin on them. So it wasn't like, this wasn't McGovern, this wasn't McGovern and Humphrey. This wasn't Reagan taking on the Republican establishment, I mean, to use the sort of two ideological poles. These were basically two men who had been real good centrist, I mean, by their own framework, centrist Democrats almost their entire life. And they were then attempting to sort of make, of relatively small differences, sort of try to make those into very large divisions.
Well, yeah, I think I would have to agree. But they did raise, as you say, Bradley raised the issue of child poverty, McCain raised the issue of campaign reform, finance reform. Now those issues essentially have disappeared because the candidates have disappeared. What happens with you and your editors now? Can you bring those issues back? Let's say, for the sake of argument, we agree that that people actually care about those two issues. And to some extent, I think they do. Now, how do you get those issues back on the front page?
Well, I mean, I always think that it's possible to resurrect issues. I mean, I guess I don't really approach, political reporting from the standpoint of like, following a little bouncing ball,
whatever
kind of Lawrence Welk kind of thing, But I think that you can write about anything at any time, any kind of way. And so I think if I was just sitting here making up a story, I think it would be interesting to see, go back and see, okay, what did Gore say? Clearly Bradley, and this happens all the time in primaries, wherever a candidate gains traction, he brings his opponents with him, and I think clearly in this case you saw Gore doing some things that would not have been his instinct had he not had the primary challenge.
Right.
So now it would be interesting to see, well, now that he doesn't have that, how much time does he spend talking about some of the things that he didn't talk about, and how does he, does he go to to Harlem. You know, he's probably not going to go visit Al Sharpton in the general election. Maybe he will, but Bradley did it first. Al Gore did. I mean, there was a debate at the Apollo. There were lots of things going on that I don't think Gore would have done naturally and instinctively. And so it'd be interesting to see if that happens in the general election.
Well, okay, but can you write a story? Let's say, here's why Gore and Bush are ignoring campaign finance reform because it's not in their interest. Can you write that story? Can you put that out there?
Sure.
Yeah.
Why not? I mean, I don't think that would be the thing that we would do as reporters in the style section of the Washington Post.
No,
but I think that our colleagues on national.
Your colleagues, right?
Sure.
Right. You could do that. Okay. What about Nader and the other challengers who are left? Who, are, of course, are not serious, but can they be treated in a way to allow issues to be raised?
Well, actually, Nader, I think, it's very striking to me. I mean, I think so far he's actually getting treated fairly seriously. And now I think you could argue fairly that the reason that he's getting treated seriously is in large part related to his ability to hurt Gore, to pull votes from Gore. But he's had a number of pieces, both in the Post and the Times, that just out on the campaign trail with him, and he's getting quoted quite a bit, of course, because he's attacking Gore. So to a certain extent, I think that you'll see some. I think you're seeing more press, frankly, than I had expected for Nader. However, I do think that for third and fourth and fifth party candidates, it tends to be sort of how they relate to and affect the central two. And frankly, I think that's a perfectly defensible intellectual choice to make. The fact is, Bush or Gore are going to be one of those two are going to be the next president of the United States, and it isn't to argue for a second not to pay attention to serious third-party challenges, but it is to say that at some level, folks, here's your choice. Here's the choice for this election.
And Nader's important only because he could steal California from Gore and therefore throw the whole thing.
Right,
to
you
Bush.
heard him in a couple different states, probably.
Right.
He's running, I think 7% in some of the polls. Who knows if that kind of numbers will hold up. But he's also, had some flirtation with union members, the Teamsters, important
UAW,
union.
right.
And so if he could pull some labor support away, he's kind of trying to expose some of Gore's, as he would say, hypocrisy on the environment, which was a central issue that kind of made Gore as a national candidate. And so, you have a lot of interesting dynamics with Nader that you probably don't have with Buchanan, and that's one thing Buchanan's complained about. He's complained to anyone who will listen that he's being ignored in press coverage, a guy who's,
well, he's
a fixture,
news, right? I mean,
a guy who's a fixture.
This is his third time around, right?
Yeah, but he's a guy who certainly knows how to normally generate coverage, so it's kind of interesting that he's complaining that he can't get coverage.
Well, I imagine the Democrats are going to make sure that they draw some attention to his candidacy at some point, because
because they need to have the same thing happening on the right that's happening on the left with Nader.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Right. And this is a man who was a proud card-carrying Republican until the last year. So I mean, you can, in some respect, take his sometimes outlandish views and fairly ask Republicans about them.
Talk show hosts, talk about important people.
if you buy the Bob Novak, I guess he had a recent column, and if you buy the line that Bush would actually like to see both of those guys included in the debates.
Right.
Gore wants to get Bush solo.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Michael Powell, Kevin Merida. Thanks for taking the time out to give us the real story. It's probably true that the influence of the media is easily overstated, but the opposite is also true. You guys do have influence, which in my opinion is actually a good thing. I'm Howard Cohen, and this has been A Second Look.
Amtrak station in Peter Pan. I enter my good government job through a rotating glass and chrome contraption. What if I get stuck, leaving me trapped between the computer's blue hum and the pigeon man's spare change? At the market next to Jesse's Cup of Dreams, a lady stands in a bulletproof cage as if there was something dangerous on this side of the glass. A man got killed in a fight down the street outside Lefty's. 2 teenagers stabbed a woman 37 times at 8th and Monroe, stuck her in the trunk of her car, and set her on fire. Tony got shot during a robbery at his parents' store at North Capitol in Florida. Now he has a special wheelchair for basketball, another one for tennis. I scan the store's 3 small aisles. A man buys a bomb pop for his son. 2 schoolgirls choose a bag of chips. Yafet pops in for his Dove Bar fix. What will protect us from the danger? I push $2 and a carton of milk through the revolving door. A woman with my face puts the milk in a bag and sends it back with change.
Welcome to Writer's Block at the Coffee House. There's an old saying that goes, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And certainly that's true for much of American life. Women, like men, are at home in the workplace. Women, like men, hold political office. But unlike men, women are so far not taken seriously as viable candidates for President of the United States. Elizabeth Dole's candidacy was short-lived due to lack of funds, and before her, Geraldine Ferraro's bid for the vice presidency was considered little more than a publicity stunt. Will all of that change in the next few years? Will America finally be ready for a female president? In the book Madam President, Shattering the Last Glass Ceiling, Eleanor, Clift, and Tom Brazaitis explore the gender gap in politics. They ask, how does the double standard still apply? Why don't women support each other more in the political arena? And which women are most likely to run for the highest office in the land? Tom Brazaitis is Washington senior editor and columnist for The Plain Dealer. Eleanor Clift is contributing editor for Newsweek magazine and a weekly panelist on the McLaughlin Group. Their previous book was War Without Bloodshed, The Art of Politics. Welcome back to the Coffee House.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Lisa.
You open this book with a chapter on Hillary Clinton, and you talk about her race with Giuliani. I wonder if you talk about what's happening now, how you see things, and now that Giuliani's not a contender.
Well, I think Hillary Clinton feels like she's already been in a Senate race for a year, and she took on one of the biggest names in New York politics, and she in effect beat him.
Yes.
By the time Mayor Giuliani bowed out of the race, Hillary was ahead in the polls, and prospects look quite bright for her to be the next senator from New York. Rick Lazio just changes the whole dynamic, and she's got to find a message to run against him, and right now they're very close in the polls, and she's got a very hard couple of months in front of her, and I think the betting is still that she can squeak through, but this is not going to be an easy electoral win for her.
The interesting thing about her candidacy from the standpoint of our book is no sooner was it clear that she was thinking about running for the Senate than the Republicans began putting out the word what she really wants to be is president. And this race is just to prepare her for running in 2004 or at the latest 2008. She had to issue a denial. She had to say, I'm going to serve out this Senate term if I'm elected, simply because there's this drumbeat for the notion that she wanted to be president. It's a sign of the way people look at women running. They're automatically a threat simply because they get into a race.
Well, you talk about that in terms of many women in this book, the images that women have to wrestle with that men don't have to. Barbara Mikulski was unmarried, for instance. Would you talk about that?
Well, Barbara Mikulski was in the House for a couple of terms before she decided to run for the Senate. And she was very conscious of the fact that her image had to be different if she wanted to be a senator. She couldn't be, as I think she put it, the loudmouth from the House, that she had to get along with the other senators. And so she worked very hard to have a different image in the Senate. But getting to the Senate, she had to fight through the rumors that perhaps that she was a lesbian and so forth. And every woman in politics who's not married faces these kind of rumors. And so women often say the best place to be in if you're going to run for office is to be a widow, because that way your children are probably grown and they're not likely to give you any trouble, and you're not going to be accused of abandoning them. And you've proved you can get a husband, but he's not there to embarrass you anymore either. So it's a pretty cynical view.
But there's also the childless thing. Elizabeth Dole, because she was childless, but no one talks about Pat Buchanan being childless. I mean, could you talk some about those things that are projected onto women specifically?
Well, everything from what women wear to this notion that they have to either be good mothers whose children are off and educated and out of the house. You know, if they're young children, right away there's this conflict between whether they can actually take on a full-time responsibility and be a mother, you know, as though children are solely the responsibility of women. Those attitudes, while we seem to have made progress on that in the broader human stage, in politics they come back, and I think they frequently hurt women who have young children. You'll remember one of our women quit the House after she was
Blanche Lincoln, who's
pregnant with twins.
Blanche Lincoln, who today is a senator from Arkansas, but she quit when she learned she was pregnant with twins, and she said something to the effect that she thought her children should learn their values from a stay-at-home mother. And then an open Senate seat came available probably 18 months later, and those opportunities don't come very often, and so she ran, and her advisors were very nervous that her opponent would raise some of her earlier statements and say, you know, hey, Blanche, you know, kids don't learn their values in 2 years. And they prepared advertising to rebut those charges and everything. But the opponent never made the case, and his wife worked, and he wasn't about to enter that arena. And so politics have changed. I mean, you have to be careful about setting off a backlash if you raise issues like that and you target women. And I just want to add that Ann Richards, who served as governor of Texas, said that, you know, there are always hurdles in politics, whether you're a man or a woman, and that the woman who works as a waitress in the corner diner is also balancing family and a job, and she gets a lot less psychic income and probably a lot less real income. So Ann Richards' comment was, you know, women, just go ahead and do it.
Right. Well, you talk about Ann Richards, you also talk about Margaret Thatcher and women who have sort of broken through, and that America is a little bit behind in this area. And we can stand a lot of women in positions of power, but not quite this, and why that is. You also talk about could a woman go through this scandal with an intern? Could a woman withstand that, whereas a man obviously has? And you say, when was the last time you heard girls will be girls versus boys will be boys?
Well, one of the things that polls show us is that most people, men and women, think women would be, one, more honest, and two, less likely to get involved in a sexual scandal.
Right.
Now, is that true? We don't know.
Right.
We don't know it because there haven't been enough women out there. We do know that the women who have run uniformly are conscious of their role as path breakers and are trying to keep a standard that's higher than men have to follow. Among the people we were impressed with, for instance, is Kathleen Kennedy Townsend from this very state. We think she has the ingredients if things break well for her and Maryland keeps going on its pretty good course and she gets elected governor, she'll be positioned to be on a national ticket. She's a Kennedy. She lights up a room when she enters it. She's got a certain gravitas about her that is, at the same time, she's taken on some tough issues, crime among them, which is not usually part of a woman candidate's portfolio, and that sets her apart also.
Right.
So she's one to watch.
And Christine Todd Whitman, too, you mentioned.
Christy Todd Whitman, the governor of New Jersey, you were mentioning Margaret Thatcher and some of these others. The governor level seems very difficult for women, and Christy Todd Whitman is the only woman ever re-elected governor of a major state, a big state. And that's quite an achievement. And she, today, we think, is the most prepared to run for national office. But she's in the wrong party. The Republicans do not like her stand on abortion and would never agree to have her on the ticket. And we feel there'd be a walkout by the conservatives at the Republican convention if George Bush were to dare to propose her as his vice president.
Wow. And at the end of the book, you have recommendations for those contenders. Would you talk a little bit about that? What they
Well, the recommendations range from the silly to the serious. Silly, you got to get over the hair and clothes thing. You got to figure out what works for you. Maybe going to an image consultant. As Kathleen Kennedy Townsend says, I hate to shop. I got somebody to go through my closet and figure out what was good, and then she doesn't worry about it anymore. And then serious issues, you have to figure out a way to project a certain toughness. And that's particularly important if you want to be seen as a potential commander-in-chief. Now, most women today don't have the military credential, although with 15% of the military now being female, we're going to be getting that in the future. That's right. And one Democratic consultant, Jeffrey Garin, said that he discovered in polling and focus groups that a woman who has beat breast cancer is considered a combatant almost in the same sense as somebody who was in World War II.
Interesting.
I want to make sure your audience knows, Lisa, that like most authors today, we have a website.
Yes.
It's madam-president.com, and there you'll find all kinds of interesting stuff about women running for office, and this book in particular was excerpted in Newsweek, and you can reflect back on, get the flavor of the book, which we think reads more like a narrative than a historical tome. It's a narrative.
But it's also, you deal with so many things. Besides the historical thing, you also talk about pop culture and the way that there's a Barbie doll now that is the President of the United States, and how these things, these images are in our heads. From the Fred McMurray movie years ago you mentioned to now, when, it's a much more feasible thing.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think society follows pop culture in many ways, and now Glenn Close has played a tough and convincing vice president in Air Force One, and we've heard that she's looking at scripts where she would play president.
Oh, good.
And Lisa Simpson, if you follow The Simpsons, was Madam President. And the movie that we rented is a 1964 movie, and it was described as a story about the first woman president. And in it, Polly Bergen does get elected president. Her husband's very unhappy. Exactly. She resigns in the end because she's pregnant. Which wouldn't happen to any woman being elected today.
We're out of time. I'm sorry. Thanks to Eleanor, Clift, and Tom Brazaitis for joining me in the coffee house. Again, their new book is Madam President, Shattering the Last Glass Ceiling. I'm Lisa Page, and this has been Writer's Block.
Years and years ago, people used to read big, fat 3-volume novels, huge panoramas of human folly stretching over generations. When I watched the new epic film Sunshine, I felt like I was inside one of those novels. It's a great big film where all the action is people-sized and character-driven. The great Hungarian director Istvan Szabo directed it. If his name rings a bell at all, it may be for the Academy Award for his movie Mephisto, or the Cannes Film Festival Award for his film Colonel Radel. But you might just know him as a great film auteur. It stars Ralph Fiennes playing not one, not two, but 3 generations in a Hungarian Jewish family.
I thought it was extraordinary. It was very dense, very layered family history, over 3 generations about a Hungarian Jewish family. It seems to cover a lot of ground socially, domestically, emotionally, spiritually. It's a very dense piece.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dr. Ignat Sonnenschein, Doctor of Law in the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Kingdom of Hungary, who has graciously come home to live with us. Now hurry up, son. May I have your mother's waiting?
Valerie has lost her parents, and so she's sort of adopted by the Sonnenschein family, which is a mother and a father and 2 sons, and raised as one of the children. And is very close to both the brothers and ends up falling in love with one of them.
I'm asking for Valerie's hand in marriage. According to the law, we are not doing anything illegal. We have been in love with each other as man and woman for years now, and our feelings haven't lessened in it.
I don't know what to do.
Who are the Sonnenscheins? Every generation of this Jewish family wants to belong and be accepted in Hungary. And that very simple desire propels the family's tragic 20th century history. Here's the second generation hero who aspires to be Hungary's Olympic fencing champion.
When all's said and done, what do you want to do?
Fence.
At what level?
The highest.
That's the officers' club. Do you want to convert?
I want to be Hungarian.
Do you think the gentlemen of the officers' club are Hungarian? They're German Serbs, the Slovaks. I promise you Hungarian's not what you have to be.
What do I have to be, Mother?
Christian.
The script was handed to me after Jennifer had read it, because it was offered to Jennifer, who is my daughter. And it was a few weeks later that it got sent to me as to see whether I would like to play the older Valerie.
Would you hug each other, please?
Happy?
I am. Are you?
Yes, madam, I am.
The film Sunshine is full of romantic intrigue and fabulous furniture and really great food. And its characters also have to deal with life's biggest, hardest questions. Here's the third generation, a boy who has survived a Nazi concentration camp and become, briefly, a Stalinist zealot.
The last part is about this last character trying to find his identity, find out who he is. Because you feel that the other two parts have sort of sacrificed who they really are, what their essential identity is.
Why are Jews involved in everything? Wasn't Auschwitz enough for you?
Even you will never be free of Auschwitz. Auschwitz was our baptism. But there is something you must know, though. Surviving Auschwitz doesn't make a man better or greater. It's just burnt into your brain. It can never be erased.
I watched this movie at the Toronto Film Festival with a group of really hardcore business people, many of whom had merely dropped in to kill time until their next appointment. Almost 3 hours later, we were all still there in our seats, captured by a story that was about then and now, about love and war, about us and them. Hope you can find the time too. Good luck and good viewing.
Welcome you, Chuck, to this edition of Tacoma Coffee House. What was the name of that tune?
That piece is called Hunters.
Okay.
It was actually named by somebody in my audience. I asked them, what does it sound like? And they told me that.
Hunters.
Yeah.
Out there searching for. It's very Celtic sounding. Very. I noticed. I was reading over a little bio that certainly people like John Renbourn, Bert Jansch, Davy Graham were influences on you, and
yeah, big time.
That's good company.
Can't do much better.
Yeah. How did you? Why them as opposed to other guitarists? I mean, what brought you in that direction?
Well, they have a wonderful mix of not only jazz, but Celtic, but blues. You know, they kind of all wrap it up in one set of fingers, so, you know, it really works.
You live in the Washington area now. How long have you been here?
15 years.
Okay. And did you, in high school, say, play in the traditional rock and roll band, or did you go right into British-based acoustic music?
Well, in high school, I was a tuba player.
Ah, of course.
Because that is the most sensuous of all wind instruments. It
Yes.
sits in your lap and vibrates.
Okay.
But then, you know, time came and I left the tuba, and guitar is a wonderful instrument because it gives you so many different strings, and with tuba you only get one note.
I think we should shamelessly plug the new release.
Yeah, that's true.
It's called
Fallen Forgotten.
Right.
It's an independent release. It's available on Amazon.com, CD now.
Okay. House of Musical Traditions.
House of Musical Traditions as
We're
well.
shameless here. We're shameless.
No
okay.
reason.
How about the group? How long have you guys been playing together?
This is Alan Sinarski and Jim Bieneman. They don't come any better. We've been together, I guess, about 6-8 months.
Okay.
And it's just, they're the best.
That's good. What kind of gigs do you play in the Washington area, say?
Oh, coffee houses, festivals. I was at the Hernan Festival. Just about everything, you know.
People come up and say, "How can I learn to play guitar like that?" Did
Yeah,
you
there are a
do
lot
any
of
teaching?
people. Yeah, there are a lot of people say, "Do you give lessons?" And I said, "Well, no."
That's really wonderful stuff. We probably have time for one more.
Great.
Would that also be off the new release?
Yes, it will, and it's a Bert Jansch piece, which I'm particularly fond of. It's
And you've twisted it and turned it in Chuck Durfer manner?
well, it's the only way to play it.
Okay, and what's it called?
It's called Running from Home.
Thank you again. Take it away.
you.
Running from home, breaking ties that you've grown, catching dreams from a cloud. City sounds burn your soul, turn your head to the cries of loneliness in the night. Like a fly when he's caught, spider soon takes his prey, spins the dance round your heart. Step on pavement old, cast a glance, the young girls making their way. Be a beauty in age, a pleasure pleasing my mind, your heart would shatter and fall. Passing image of you reflects a pain to my heart, disappears in the crowd. Running from home, breaking ties that you've grown, catching dreams from a cloud.
That's it for the Dog Days edition. See you in September in the Coffee House.